So I'm Katie Wagner, Smithsonian Libraries and Archives book conservator, and I'll be moderating tonight, introducing the speakers, and we will ask questions after each presentation. First up is Alice Craigie, and Alice is the Modern Paintings Fellow until 2026 at the National Gallery of Art. She completed her postgraduate diploma in the conservation of easel paintings at the Cortland Institute of Art in 2019. Since graduating, Alice has worked at Julianago Conservation, London's foremost modern and contemporary conservation studio, and Tate Gallery London as an assistant conservator. During her fellowship at the NGA, she undertakes practical conservation treatments alongside in-depth research projects focused on a revised technical study of the 12 Amedeo Modigliani paintings that form part of the National Gallery's Chesterdale collection. Take it away, Alice. Unveiling Red Star. Sounds great.
Okay. Well, hello everyone. Thank you for that that lovely welcome, and thank you so much for attending my session at the Three Ring. I'm really pleased to be here presenting to all of you. So I'll be talking to you today very briefly about the artist Raymond Saunders, with a focus on his work Red Star, which is dated 1970. I'll begin by introducing the artist before outlining the minor conservation treatment, and finish by sharing some select discoveries and technical study. But first, who was he? Raymond Saunders was born in 1934 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and he emerged in the 1950s as an influential abstract artist. He maintains a lively legacy and a continued influence among contemporary artists today. He received his formal training from various institutions along the East Coast, such as the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, the Barnes Foundation in Philadelphia, and the Carnegie Institute of Technology. Saunders also continued his studies in Europe and won the Rome Prize for Solo Painter in 1964. He exhibited across Europe and even organized a groundbreaking conference in 1994 titled A Visual Arts Encounter, African Americans in Europe, which was attended by the likes of Carrie Mae Reeves, Betty Saar, Faith Ringgold, and Sam Gillen. However, he spent most of his life and career based in Oakland, California, which he did state in an interview was largely due to the sunshine. And honestly, as a Brit, I really can't blame him for making that choice. So Saunders is also well known for his somewhat controversial pamphlet, Black as a Colour, which is dated 1967. This called for, quote, the rejection of the degrading limitations and to recognise the wider reality of art, where colour is the means and not the end. Essentially, this text challenges the causal link between identity and race alongside a play in the chemistry of colour. So here are three examples of artworks by Saunders that represent his characteristic abstraction and juxtaposition of found elements alongside a range of incorporated and seemingly disparate materials. His works are often referred to as assemblages and seem to defy the boundaries of traditional labels, refusing to conform to what we might perceive as a painting, a sculpture, or a drawing. Black as a colour features heavily in Saunders' work and throughout his career, but becomes especially dominant in his later works, as you can see in the painting on the right. To quote Saunders himself, he says, "I love black as a colour, I can make it sing immediately." In November 2022, the Sonoma Valley Museum of Art hosted a panel discussion to coincide with their exhibition, Raymond Saunders on Freedom and Trust. And one of the panelists there stated, "In the hands of Saunders, black is not a racial marker, but a compositional element." The use of white chalk on top of a black background, denoting scribbles and handwritten notations, such as the artwork on the right, seemed to echo a blackboard, which many have proposed is reminiscent of his time Saunders spent working as a teacher. However, I caution against too much interpretation, as there are certain challenges working with living artists, and this is certainly the case of Saunders, who is now in his late 80s and has maintained an ongoing rejection of narrative and a persistent refusal to offer any kind of interpretation of his work. So this sentiment is perhaps summarized best by one of his most pervasive quotes: "If we could speak it, we would not paint it," which he said during a filmed interview conducted by SF MoMA in 1994. This is a really amazing interview, and I'll share a link at the end alongside the pamphlet, but I'd really encourage anyone interested to watch it. He talks in these wonderful but profoundly circular ways that I find equally compelling as they are confusing. And here is a page of some of those quotes that I have. I won't read these all out to you, but my favorite is, "The question is answered with a question, with a statement about the question." And I really still have absolutely no idea what he's trying to get across with that quote. But the last quote I've included on this slide states, It's fallacious to think that when you see something in a gallery that it is finished, or when you see something hung that it is complete. It is just where it is for some other reason, and that process is ongoing. I thought this was particularly pertinent as Saunders unpacks the tension experienced by artists when they see their work in a different context, or perhaps maybe several years later. He gave an interview, he gave an anecdote in this interview about walking into a gallery where his work was hung, and he began to modify it on the gallery walls, which was obviously to the horror of the art dealer and the security staff. So now I'll segue into two of the works that form part of the National Gallery collection. Oh, have I gone? Sorry, I think I've taken one too many here. Sorry, I've completely lost my place. Oh yeah, here we go. All right, so on the left we have They Don't Always See You, which is dated 1996 and was only acquired last year. And on the right we obviously have Red Star, dated 1970. Red Star is perhaps more indicative of his earlier works, incorporating a brighter and more colourful palette, exhibiting complex layering in addition to a variety of materials and application techniques. Red Star is comprised of an array of materials, including oil stick, oil paint, house paint or some kind of alkyd, metallic paint, stencils, masking tape, pencil markings, and collaged elements. Material has been poured, dripped, brushed, smeared, scraped, and removed. And it's been very rewarding trying to get to the bottom of how this painting was made and what the layering was. I honestly still have a lot of questions, and I see new things every time I go back to the surface, which has been really fun. So I just wanted to show a few more details of how the painting was made, such as in this one, you can see all kinds of like two different kinds of blues. The yellow paint appears to have been applied by a roller brush with the characteristic feathered edges on the right, but it's also been allowed to drip down the surface. It's been incised and scraped away with the roller brush. And here, if I draw your attention to this side, the dilute purple was liberally applied and manipulated on the surface, which pooled and agitated in each motion the pinkest passion below. These are my two favorite details. The wrinkling of the alkyd paint that's pooled on the surface, and below the incised markings, which give an optical shift to make the lower layer appear pink. Again, in both of these images, it looks like there's a green paint, but this is actually just the result of a kind of skim of yellow on top of a turquoise blue. And then you can also see that he's kind of scraped and pulled away the skin of medium in the lower detail. And then here, I hope you can see that this yellow paint was kind of applied across to the left of the Red Star, but then has been wiped away, which is possibly by the shape of the artist's hand as well, because there's actually a palm print in the bottom of that image. Saunders utilised the texture in the wrinkling paint once dry to emphasise the patterns that are there, and there's a lot of push and pull on the surface. Everything is deliberate but also in flux and controlled, but as with his other works, the process of creation was prolonged, and the drawing and scribbles were applied to fully dry paint layers, and in some cases then obscured again. So the process itself is to some degree the aesthetic. So Saunders' paintings or assemblages are abstract and echo his surrounding urban environment. To quote the Hammer Museum, billboard advertisements, graffiti, flashing lights, and police sirens are only some of the references Saunders makes to construct an urban world that often envelopes the viewer in a cacophony of brash colours and assorted shapes. So with this in mind, I wanted to draw your attention to the little red shapes to the left of the star that our curator has lovingly referred to as the jelly beans or gumdrops. But when I came across this quote, I wondered if perhaps they're actually referencing the police sirens. So now I'll briefly touch on the conservation treatment. Red Star was the first treatment I actually undertook as a fellow at the NGA. It was relatively straightforward, and it was addressing aspects such as realignment onto a new structure, correction of minor deformations, and mitigation of flaking. And here is an example of some of the cracks that I observed along the edges. Because of where some of them were located, I was able just to use a clamp against the stretcher bar itself, and then either isinglass or lascaux to consolidate according to the area. I also reconstructed some impasto losses, but as I said, the treatment was largely localized to the parameter and turnover edges, and it was fairly routine. However, the work being in the lab did present a perfect opportunity to conduct some technical study. So here we have the X-ray and infrared. I honestly had no idea what this kind of imaging would reveal in a work like this that incorporates so many different potential mediums and materials. And as is often the case, the imaging sparked further questions about the surface, such as why does the thicker poured paint appear so X-ray dense in comparison to the yellow passages, which are completely transparent? I was especially excited about the infrared because of the collaged elements and what looked like newspaper print or possibly some pencil or dry medium. And the infrared did reveal more of these pencil scribbles, as I hope you can see on this detail. This section of the painting also incorporates Saunders' signature, which follows the diagonal passage of yellow paint. Now, if I move to another detail, I hope you can see that there are two other signatures present. These are in the lower right corner of the painting, and both have been crossed out. The top one still remains visible in normal light, but the infrared revealed a third signature, which had been crossed out and then totally obscured by subsequent paint layers. But moving on to more exciting discoveries, and these are connected with the collage elements. So I'll start with this small rectangular fragment, which is located in the center lower third of the painting. And here is the corresponding infrared detail of this piece, which revealed what looked like two faces or maybe a mask. I began to try and identify these, and my initial thoughts were perhaps an exhibition ticket, but I struggled to find anything. Returning back to the paint surface, I realized I could just about make out the number 100 in the corner on the painted image. This would have been transparent in infrared, and it led me to start looking for money. In the end, I was able to identify that this is actually a West African banknote. After chatting with the bank online, I also managed to find out that the A in R1 denotes it specifically from the Ivory Coast. Next are these two fragments, which flank the money, which they appear back to front as they're applied face in towards the canvas. When I flipped them, I realized that they in fact pieced together. And from this, I was able to find that it's actually a Tissot watch advert from the 1960s. Now, this advert was placed face in, and I thought it was unlikely that Saunders had selected it for the watch advert. The front side had become largely transparent, so I began trying to source where the advert was from in the hope that I could see what was on the other side. The image of the advert I found dates it as October 13th, 1968, and the small print indicates that this is from the New York Times magazine. Except I was still unable to source a copy of the magazine where I could find the advert, so I began looking for clues back on the paint surface. There are two distinctive markers that I hope you can see in this. The top right shows a possible signature, and then there's some stars with the blue background towards the left. The signature was hard to decipher, but I was able to just about make out the word Bearden, which made me think of the artworks by Romain Bearden. And after a bit of sleuthing, I found this one comparable collage work, which I hope you can see the similarity with the signature in the top right corner. I felt fairly confident that this piece could be some kind of early reproduction of a Bearden collage, but again, I was really struggling for a long time to find exactly the right one. Until after some more sleuthing, I found this one, which is Soul Histories, dated 1969, which belongs to the Harvard Art Museum. And here you see the crop details. I hope you agree that it's a match. And fortuitously, I made this discovery while waiting for a flight to Boston, so I managed to see the collage in person just 2 days later. So I still haven't been able to identify where this was reproduced, but I find it fascinating that Saunders included this work by Bearden, and significant that it evokes centuries of African-American history. The fragment likely turned transparent as soon as Saunders made it, and he seemed to have removed the central part, which perhaps remained more readily identifiable. What fascinates me most is Saunders' apparent intentionality, creating a deliberate tension between the visibility and concealment. It also seems equally important to him that these fragments are incorporated as much as they are obscured. So this research is ongoing, and I'm working with a wonderful scientist to try and identify the various medium that's present, and I hope to publish this in a future FACTSHA article. So as I come into land, I just wanted to share this final collaged element, and here is the best that I've been able to transcribe it so far. It has been infuriating, and I'm yet to get wise and find out who Sam the numbers man is, which is really annoying. So if anyone has any ideas, I would love to hear them. But for now, thank you very much for listening, and here are the links as mentioned.
Are there any questions for Alice? Great. I was interested that you found 3 signatures, and you said most artists are fairly finished, but did you normally sign if you thought it was a finished stage, so you came back and worked it again and then signed again and then did that?
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about, but whenever people talk to him, he doesn't necessarily follow any rhyme or reason. And there is actually a similarity with an artist that he knew that followed, he would write his signature kind of following these thin passages of paint and writing them along. So when I'd spoken to our curator, he thought possibly he's kind of playing around with what he liked and maybe had done a studio visit or seen his friend and was inspired by that way of writing his signature. But he doesn't seem to kind of have a pattern that I found so far. Yeah. And please feel free to email me if you have any questions or anything else. Anyone?
So I am introducing Grace Walters, who's going to talk to you about in situ stain reduction in collage using solvent gels and silicone-based masking agent. Grace is a paper conservator at the Library of Congress here in Washington, D.C. She received a Master's of Arts and a Certificate in Advanced Study in Art Conservation from SUNY Buffalo in 2020, where she specialized in paper conservation. Previously, Grace worked at a wide range of institutions, including the Carter Museum of American Art, the Weissman Preservation Center at Harvard Libraries, and the Mental Collection. Her background in architecture from Clemson University prior to her art conservation provides her with a foundation in spatial planning and understanding of the importance of material choices, creative problem solving, and collegial collaboration. Her current research pursuits include novel imaging techniques to observe paper and adhesive research for use with paper-based artifacts. Welcome, Grace.
Hello, everyone. As Katie said, my name is Grace Walters, and I'm a paper conservator at the Library of Congress. I want to thank the Washington Conservation Guild for hosting this fabulous event, and an extra thank you for navigating all the last-minute scheduling changes so smoothly. It's a tremendous amount of work, and I want to acknowledge that. In particular, this is such a great event to share and celebrate the amazing work that's going on locally here in DC. My goal tonight is to share a treatment I did last year, where I tried a couple of new techniques that I heard about from other conservators when they presented their findings. The first technique is a method of making a solvent gel with a co-solvent and then using it in combination with cyclomethicones. This was introduced by Françoise Richard, a private paper conservator in Amsterdam, at the 2023 International Association of Book and Paper Conservators Conference, or IATA. She just published the paper on the project, which is the top link, and I'm also including a link to her IATA presentation on the same topic, which is now up on YouTube, and it's a fabulous talk. The other person I want to mention before we begin is senior paper conservator Susan Peckham, my colleague at the Library of Congress, who has done some great work with cyclomethicones and who made herself available for consult and advice during this treatment. She presented a project where cyclomethicones were the key to her success, separating a stack of documents with soluble inks that were stuck together with dextrin at the 2022 ICOM-CC Graphic Documents Working Group Conference. There's also a good article on cyclomethicones as masking agents in preparation for aqueous treatment out of Germany, published in 2021. Now, this paper includes some interesting tests regarding the ability of cyclomethicones to prevent tide line formation. For those who might be interested to know more, those links are here, and I'll also have these all at the end as well. And this is one of my favorite aspects about the field, that we can learn new techniques from others as they present their findings in a way that's practically helpful to other conservators. Okay, now to the treatment. This piece came down to my bench from the Prints and Photographs Division for treatment in the fall of 2023. It's original cover art for the Vanity Fair magazine, specifically the October issue published in 1933. The image depicts silhouettes of two men conversing with each other. They are cut out from a section of newspaper showing an alphabetical list of stock and dividend rates of companies. The figure on the left is a stout man in a top hat smoking a cigar and is made from thin, smooth newsprint printed in black printing ink adhered to another piece of thin wove paper cut to the same dimension. The figure on the right depicts a more disheveled man holding a crutch in an outstretched hand made from thin newsprint printed in black printing ink. This paper has been crumpled and smoothed out before being adhered to another piece of thin wove paper cut to the same dimension. Both the newsprint and the support papers are adhered to another piece of wove paper. And this paper has a thin red machine-applied coating on the face. It's painted with black media and has annotations in graphite, which are mostly embellishments of the collage figures. And all of these elements are adhered overall to a commercially produced illustration board. Four torn pieces of paper, four torn pieces of printed black and white registration marks are adhered to the illustration border on the perimeter of the red paper, and that would have been used in the reproduction process to make the cover. There are heavy adhesive residues present along the perimeter of the top half of the illustration board, indicating previous attachment to some kind of face mat. You can see the published cover from the Vanity Fair archive shown on the right, and it's a fairly faithful reproduction, although you can see some discrepancies between the two, like the printed dates in red, the title block, which is now missing, and some variation due to aging, like the mottled red and black background and the more significant yellowing of the newsprint figure on the left. The piece sits in the Caroline and Irwin Swan collection of caricature and cartoon, which includes many examples of early original cover art for the Vanity Fair magazine. And as original cover art, the piece is ephemeral and intermediate in nature. It was designed and created to be photo reproduced, and for that reproduction to be the image. As such, the materials used to create this object were not chosen for their durability, but rather what was available to capture and convey the moment. The main reason it came to the lab was that the collage element of the man on the right was only attached in this area, with a very high danger of being separated from the collage itself, and there were also some minor damages throughout the piece. In addition to stabilizing and rehousing the object, I proposed testing the adhesive staining in the two figures to see if there could be a visible reduction, and the goal was not to make it look like new, but rather to reduce the contrast between the yellowing adhesive and the newsprint. After conversations with curator Sarah Duke, we came up with these treatment goals. The first was to reduce the yellowed adhesive from the figures, working in situ if possible, and retaining the original character of the newsprint figures. The second was to stabilize the rest of the object, including securing the collaged elements to their supports and consolidating the edges of the illustration board. And finally, I would rehouse the object for safe viewing, handling, and storage. So the first step of the treatment was solvent testing. I tested for solubility of the adhesive with ethanol, acetone, and mixtures of ethanol and acetone. I applied solvent to a microswab and worked in a discrete area of the piece, isolating the newsprint from the secondary support with a thin blotter. During solvent testing, I noticed two things. The first was that while acetone was very successful at solubilizing the adhesive, there was a blue component of the printing ink that was also slightly soluble in acetone. The other was that tide lines formed from the acetone application, and you can see in the normal before and after that the adhesive was reduced, but in the UVA shot, you can also see that it migrated into the surrounding paper. Because of these two reasons, I tested a cyclomethicone masking agent, D5-D6. Cyclomethicones refer generally to a class of cyclic siloxanes. When you hear the terms D4, D5, and D6, that just refers to the number of siloxanes within the ring. And they're commonly used in cosmetics and they have been used as fixatives or masking agents in conservation applications due to their slow evaporation rate, which is similar to cyclododecane. As with any solvent work, always make sure to do your research before you use it. The European Union has found all three of these solvents to be very persistent and very bioaccumulative, and D4 has also been found to be toxic. I always use PPE rated for the solvent I'm working with, minimize contact, and use fume trunks. After brush applying the D5-D6 to the area I wanted to test, I swabbed the adhesive with acetone and was happy with the results. I didn't see any tide lines or adhesive migration in UVA, no blue printing ink component on my swab, and the adhesive reduced successfully. From there, I prepared the solvent gels. I chose a gel application as opposed to swabs because of the wrinkled nature of the paper, the fragility of the newsprint, and the increased dwell time you get from the gel to solubilize the adhesive. I followed the method that Françoise Richard published in her article, which is linked at the top right of the screen. She writes that if you want to fully replace a higher polarity solvent within a gel system with a lower polarity solvent, you need to use a co-solvent that's miscible in both the higher polarity and the lower polarity solvent. So by progressively soaking the gel in increasing amounts of the co-solvent, you can successfully fully replace the higher polarity solvent with the lower. And in this case, the co-solvent was ethanol, miscible in both water, my higher polarity solvent, and acetone, my lower polarity solvent, which I prepared in an agar gel. The ethanol mixes with and slowly replaces the water in the gel structure, which is then able to be replaced with the acetone. I chose a 5% agarose gel and made it up with 75% water, and I cooked it in the microwave until bubbling, and then I stirred in the remaining 25% ethanol and cast the gel immediately. Once cooled, I soaked the gel in a jar of 1:1 water to ethanol for 2.5 hours. Then I switched the gels to a jar of 75% ethanol, 25% water, and soaked for another 2.5 hours. And from there, I soaked the gels in 100% ethanol overnight, which was a factor of the workday being over. And the next morning, I switched the gels to 100% acetone and soaked them for another 2.5 hours. And it was fascinating to feel the difference in the gels after the progressive co-solvent changes. I've soaked an agarose gel in solvent before without doing the progressive changes, and while they did carry some solvent, they were still quite flexible and pretty squishy. And after doing these progressive changes, ending in acetone, the gel was extremely rigid and not squishy at all. And the paper actually, she tests MEK and I believe ethyl acetate. She doesn't test acetone in the paper, but she says it should work, and it does work. I worked under a fume trunk with gloves and isolated the collage layer from the secondary support with a piece of polyester. I cut the gels to the rough size of the adhesive areas. I brush applied D5, D6 liberally to the area around the adhesive staining on the recta and on the versa if I could access it. As I mentioned earlier, there's been some literature on cyclomethicones published recently that was very helpful as I was considering how to approach this treatment. I learned from the Kohler article that D5, D6 is miscible in acetone, which would eat into my masking time, and Susan Peckham, my colleague, advised me to, in general, reapply more often than you would think to combat the continual evaporation. After brush applying the D5, D6, I placed a piece of gel on the area of adhesive and placed a piece of polyester over the top to reduce evaporation. I added a small weight to the top to encourage conformity. After 5 minutes, I removed the gel and let the area evaporate under the fume trunk. And the gel, even though it was quite rigid, it did conform to the surface of the paper, especially the wrinkled areas. And I could see yellowed adhesive in the gel once it was removed, and under UVA, I didn't see any tide lines or adhesive migration into the surrounding paper. So I worked in this manner for the areas of adhesive in the man on the right. And I did attempt to reuse the gels after soaking them in a separate rinse jar of acetone. It was mildly successful. I did get some more adhesive to come up, but it wasn't as successful as the first use. And if I were to do this treatment again, I would probably forego the reuse of the gel. In the end, I decided not to treat the man on the left. This was for a couple of reasons. I tested a small area by his toe with acetone and found that the solvent shifted the tone of the paper slightly. This newsprint was not lifting at all at the edges, and it was quite fragile. This meant that I would not be able to isolate the newsprint in the same manner as the man on the right. Another thing I considered was that the newsprint was very even in tone, and the stain of the adhesive was closer in color to the yellowed newsprint than it was in the other figure. Because the tonal variation was much less between the adhesive and the paper, the risk of separating the newsprint from the support paper was quite high, and the shift in tone I noticed after solvent testing, I left the stains, determining the risk was greater than the reward in this case. Now here's the piece before and after. After reducing the staining, I stabilized the object, including consolidating the corners of the illustration board and securing the newsprint, where I was lifting back to the support paper with a 4% methylcellulose. You can see I left the bulk adhesive around the perimeter of the board. This was not deemed a material risk to the image, and therefore it wasn't a focus of the treatment. Instead, I created a sink mat for the board and overmapped the image, which visually covered the adhesive residues in the margin. I think all in all, the treatment was quite successful. The treatment goals were achieved, and I was happy to try out 2 new treatment methods, masking with cyclomethicones and preparing solvent gels with a co-solvent to replace the water. And this was a great opportunity to try a method that allowed me to work in situ, and I was especially impressed by the mitigation of adhesive migration into the surrounding paper. I'm grateful to Françoise Richard, Susan Peckham, and Karen Kohler et al. For publishing their research and presenting it to the larger community. Thank you also to the paper conservators at the Library of Congress, who I talked this treatment through with. It's a great joy to work with colleagues who are encouraging, full of good questions, and always eager to learn new things. And thanks to you all for listening, and I'm happy to receive any questions. Yes.
There are 2 questions.
Yeah, there's. Go ahead.
Thank you for such a great presentation. That was really interesting. I'm just curious. So, I mean, I'll read the paper that you cited, but the concentration of agar gel that you're using was 4%? Is that
5%.
5%.
Yeah.
So you actually went even quite higher. That's interesting. And you
Yeah.
still had a really good solvent retention within that.
Yeah, it was amazing. It was a very dry, like it felt so dry, the gel.
Yeah.
And it was really hard, and I was like, this isn't gonna work, this is crazy. And then I put it on, and it really suctioned it up into the gel, probably a couple of millimeters into the gel. It was kind of amazing.
So that leads to my second question. Did you notice any dimensional change in the gel? Did it swell?
It didn't swell. I put the plastic over it because it would kind of start to evaporate, and so once the solvent left the gel, it would get really hard on the edge, and that's why I think it wasn't really great to reuse it. I think in the time that you're using it the first time, it dries out a little bit on the edge, and you can soak it again, but it's just not it's not as effective.
Yeah, I'm interested to know, acetone brittles everything, so interesting to see how the MEK
Yeah.
behaves, or the ethyl acetate that you mentioned.
Yeah, and actually you could do solvent mixtures, you know, it's really about being able to use a water-based gel with a solvent successfully. Because I've used the agar gel and soaked it in the solvent, but it's still, you can still see the effect of water on your piece sometimes, just because the gel is made from water. So it really did drive it out. I was pretty impressed.
And just one last question. When you're talking about the percentage that you're able to, you're talking about the pure percentage of what you're soaking it in. So did you have an indication of what the percentage is actually in the gel matrix?
No idea.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Hi, thank you. I had just had the opportunity to read the Richard paper, and I also highly recommend the YouTube presentation, which is as informative as it is funny sometimes, but also very practical. One of the things I picked up in this paper is the rather kind of long tail of retention of the cyclomethicons, and I'm wondering if you had any opportunity to, or if any of the other papers, which I haven't seen, cover a way of assessing full evaporation.
No, I agree with you. I don't know. I would say that this project actually made me more interested in like what are like cyclomethicones in general. The German paper, assesses immersion in aqueous treatments, cyclomethicone use in immersion in aqueous treatments, which I thought was kind of interesting. But because they're miscible, I don't know if that makes it easier for them to like completely leave the paper. But I don't know of anything that's really assessed the efficacy of evaporation of cyclomethicones. So I would be interested in that.
So you said, and Susan Packham said, you know, it was evaporating faster than you thought, but you're also getting that extremely rapid exchange under fuel.
Totally.
So in that practical consideration, you know, how is it when you make that choice to take it out, you know, and then start handing it over to the person who's doing that in framing, or just have it out in the lab and people being maybe nervous about it? So.
Sure. You mean like with the cyclomethicone still being in the paper?
Correct.
Yeah.
The visual assessment.
Sure. Yeah, I will say, I don't know if you've used the cyclomethicones. When you put them on, it looks like you're just pouring mineral spirits on your paper and you kind of have a heart attack. So visually, you know, you do see the reduction. I do understand the kind of idea that there's still like little bits of molecules left in there. And I did work under the fume trunk, as I said, and I did let it evaporate quite a while. And then it was in my drawer for a while after, before I got around to matting it. So I think it's a great thing to think about if you're using them in the future, about like who you pass it on to next. I think that's a great thought.
Really quickly, I've read a little bit about the use of menthols in lieu of cyclododecane, and possibly the menthol effects of cyclomethicone, because I'm not a maple conservator. Is that ink from newsprint also soluble in menthol?
Don't know.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't test for menthol.
No worries.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. You know it's going to involve something I should get.
Yeah. Great. Oh, one more.
When
you were re-soaking, were you going directly to the acetone, or were you kind of taking it back through that cycle again?
Yeah,
Or dipping it back down like acetone, ethanol, and then acetone?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was dipping right back into 100% acetone, mostly to clear the adhesive. That's where I started, and then I kind of noticed, I had it out on a blotter, and I was like, actually, you know, there's still some work happening here. So I tried it. I think that if you wanted to reuse it, you could probably go a little bit more methodical with your method, and I imagine it would be possible to, you know, if you wanted to play with the solvent, change again. You might be able to rehydrate that and then re-soak it, but I didn't do that.
If you could like take it in reverse and then come back.
Yeah, I will say in her article, she does suggest 2.5 hours for soaking time for a 4 millimeter gel. So the length of time you soak is based on the thickness of your gel. And I would say that that was it's not a quick thing to prepare. So it took a whole day to soak all these, to make them and soak them before I was working on it. So that would be something to consider.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Grace.
Yep.
Okay, so next up, we have Ana Gabriela Calderón Puente. She is a conservation fellow at the Smithsonian Institution, working with the Time-Based Media and Digital Arts Working Group in Washington, financed by the National Collections Program. During her fellowship, she collaborated with 3 Smithsonian museums, the Smithsonian American Art Museum, the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden, and the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum. She holds a BA from Mexico's National School of Conservation, where she specialized in the conservation of contemporary art. Welcome.
Thank you for to be here today. Let me start today I'm going to share with you the first steps of my research as part of my fellowship in the Times Media and Digital Art Working Group, the SATBMA. I am doing my research focused on the exploration and application of 3D models to document and reconstruct Times Media artworks. The principal goals of this of my research is assess both the potential benefits for conservation and installations process and the possibilities of these techniques for create and develop a guide that aligns workflows, methodologies, and best practice of these 3D documentations. My research methodology is involved selecting 4 case studies from 3 Smithsonian museums, I mentioned it like before, principally the Smithsonian American Art Museum, the Hirshhorn, and the Cooper Hewitt. I'm proposing a workflow, a very poor workflow for the digital reconstruction of each artwork. In this way, one of my case studies in the Smithsonian American Art Museum is the electronic superhighway. The electronic superhighway continental USA, Alaska, and Hawaii is a multimedia installation piece created by the artist Paik in 1995. Since 2006, it's been part of the museum permanent exhibitions. This artwork, actually let me put a little video, you can see a little bit more about the artwork. This artwork is composed of 50 videos, channels distributed across 336 television sets on and one CCTV loop located in the exact location as is the artwork here in Washington, D.C. The monitors are delimited by a map of the United States, Alaska, and Hawaii made with 575 feet of neon tubes. The distinctive features of the representation is that unique combination of colors and video patterns illuminating each state. This video showcases a variety of images ranging from natural landscape, city views, movie clips, TV programs, historical moments, and artists collaborating with Paik to video created by the artist himself to evoke his interpretations and relationship with each state of the country. Before to start any process of 3D reconstruction, something like that, my first step was determine what was my objective of this documentation. So, the first one of the importance is to be a case study, and take and provide valuable information of the research for the research and the level of the guide what I'm working. My second objective is the conservation document. The information collected in the 3D model, the structural organization, the electronic connections, and the AV connection associated with the function of the artwork will serve as a detailed reference for future conservation treatment, installation process, or modification that may be necessary, taking into consideration the frequent changes that the work can need with the new technologies that facilitate its operation. And the last one is the public access. I want to create a file who can be like the democratic access for the electronic superhighway more easy. This three-dimensional documentation aims to be a digital representation of the artwork, like showing how it is look, this function, making it accessible to the public. Including people who cannot physically visit the museum, users will be able to interact with the artwork from anywhere, and it's expected that the documentation will facilitate new forms on learning and research on Namjoon Paik's artwork. Okay, so before to start with the 3D in general process, considering the installation characteristic of the artwork and the complexity of gathering information of all of these components, the first step was to conduct a general documentation of the structure, the individual components, and the electronic connection within the place in the artwork. Here I have one of the my first drawing what I made of all the models and size what we have of the television and monitors in the electronic superhighway. This other is one with all the dimensions what we have inside of the artwork, and I was trying to see like the artwork like a system because it's very complex. We have many types of like equipment, and we have like all these like connections between the some television, between the audio, between the video, and the players. So I was trying like to understand very well the artwork like before to try anything like with the 3D documentation. One of the like general documentation what I did too was this like diagram illustrator to make us more easy to understand like the organization. So if you want, you can choose like, for example, if you only want to see like the TVs of like 2 inches, you can like choose, or if you want only to see the speakers, or you only want to see the structure of the neons, or if you want to choose one state, you can see what neons and what TVs are only that in that state. So it's a little part of what I want to enter 3D. You can choose that into 3D and in 3-dimensional see what we have in the state and what we have in the structure of the artwork. So then when I finished this, I was, okay, it's my moment to start to with my 3D process. Understanding the complexity of the artwork, I opted to create 2 types of 3-dimensional models, each with distinct different characteristics. The first model documents the current state of the artwork using photogrammetry. This technique involves capturing multiple images of an object from the different angles, identify common reference points with a latest imaging to reconstruct the object's geometry into a 3-dimensional digital model. This model provides information about the current appearance and the organization of the artwork in general. However, the result is a single unified model, a continuous mesh, where the different parts of the artwork are not individually distinguishable. So, principally with this 3D model is like making one object in 3D, one photogrammetry. And for the second model, since one of the main goals of the documentation was obtain detailed information about the complete functionality of the artwork, a second 3D model reconstruction was developed using solid modeling and photogrammetry too. This approach allows each component and the artwork to be represented individually, making it possible to analyze and understand the roles separately. Additionally, this model serves a tool for potential future iteration of the artwork. Unlike the photogrammetry-based model, this model allows for the integration of animation shoot as a neon-like effects, the playback of the videos under a perspective screen, and the inclusion of the sound elements. Here we can see you can see in the 2 models we need to create like the photogrammetry. So the photogrammetry process began the last summer with the help of Dan Field, the media conservation at the SAMS, and my coordinator too, and Anais Rivera Guzman, who was our SIVA intern. You can see here our SIVA intern, and here is Dan and I working in the photogrammetry process. So in the first one, we can see we are taking the photogrammetry photos for all the artwork. In this part, we are thinking only for the individuals TVs. We don't took the photos for all the TVs, we only take one per like model to put that and replicate in the second, in the model B. In the case, for example, for the USA, the continental USA, we took 834 photos. And in the case of each monitors, we took like 200, like 300 per like model. In the post-processing stage, I used Metashape Arisode, and experiments were also conducted with Gaussian splat to obtain more information from the reflective areas. Additionally, during the photogrammetry process, I used a polarized light filter to significantly reduce reflection in certain areas. Here you can see a little bit more about how looks this process of the photogrammetry in one of the TVs. So we took all these photos of the photos to create the reproduction in digital. And here we have one example of one of the TVs. So this is the final work what we have only with the photogrammetry process, but after this we need to work more in other type of software like Blender to make some changes and some change in the mesh to have a more accurate model. Okay. Here I have one first view, what I made, the first test, what I made of the animations. In the left, we have the real object, who looks, and in the right, we have the animation of the neons, the 3D model. In this case, is one part of Hawaii, is one of the televisions of Hawaii. So I was trying to work to put on the lights even in the 3D model, and I was working to improve the videos inside and the audio inside of the digital monitors. So let me give you an example how looks the video. Sorry. One of the things what I tried to do with the animation of the videos was only put the video, was understand how it is working the artwork. And normally in the artwork we have CTR monitors. And I don't know if sometimes you have the opportunity to see one CTR monitor very close. Normally these monitors works with the separation of 3 colors of the image. So I made the same in the digital model. So I take the videos and I made the code to separate the colors and have all the lines very similar and accurate like a CRT monitor. Yeah. So, and I need to say, my investigation and my final documentation of this artwork, electronic superhighways, is ongoing. I don't have a final model to show you today, but I'm working now in the process of make the modeling of all the parts of the electronic superhighway, which is basically, you can see here the scaffold. You can I'm putting all the good parts with the exact measurement what they have in the real artwork. I'm working to create a diagram of all the connection of the electrical and the AV connection of the artwork to put that information to the 3D and make all this conclusion to have a more accurate 3D model of the artwork. Yeah, that's principally what I have. I want to say, before to finish, thank you so much for all the people who helped me in this process of this case study and my other case study. Thank you so much to Amber Kerr, to Dan Finn too, and all the people in the SAMs who support me and help me a lot. And thank you all of you for listening my talk and to be here. Thank you so much.
Questions for Annie? Have you been able to apply the photogrammetry to either other work at, say, Cooper Hewitt or the Hirshhorn as well?
What do you mean?
Have you been able to do photogrammetry on other objects and found it useful?
Oh yeah. like in my other case study, they have like, I like this because we choose like different case study with different like difficulties and different necessities. So yeah, I'm using principally photogrammetry for the others too. For example, in the case of the Superhighway, I was using like a 360 camera to make some like a documentation with a different like configuration of everything. But yeah, I was principally using part of this, but I feel I'm trying to like create a workflow for each artwork depending what I need and the context of the artwork a little bit more.
It's not a question, I just want to say congratulations because your modeling, when you just see the modeling here, you cannot see how much work that was put on that. And I think all of us as a conservators, the part of how to make the condition reports and how do you capture all this information is very important, and in your work you are taking that and trying to do in a very archaeological way, that you are separating each part of that art and creating the access for each of those parts, and I think is separate. So congratulations.
Thank you very much for your share. Any questions?
Yes.
In that sense, what would be the limitations that you see in terms of cost, time, and storing all of the information, considering that the photogrammetry has like a lot of photos and the files must be like really heavy?
I feel when I start to think things, I don't feel all the like time is media hours needs this type of documentation. I feel like before to start this, we really need to understand like what is your objective and what you need and what can be helpful. But I feel, for example, one of the limitations what I've seen in the case, for example, of photogrammetry was a little bit like the type of materials what we have, and sometimes that can be like difficult to take the photogrammetry and the post-processing in the software. And the other thing is like conservator, I feel is a little more easy to understand. Like for me, I really like this type of stuff, but I know not for all the people can be like very, very easy to do this type of documentation. So I feel like can take time. The good thing is, for example, for the equipment, if you are doing a photogrammetry, you only use a camera and the software. You don't need so much. But I feel, yeah, you need, maybe the limitations can be a little, sometimes like the materials in the process, or to like your time, yeah, the time can be extended in some parts.
What software are you using?
I was trying to test two software, Reality Capture and MetaShape Agrisoft for the photogrammetry process. For the post-processing, like the freeze model, I am using Blender basically because it's like open code software, so I really like it. So it's principally that three, my principal.
How are you going to make it available after you're done?
Okay. First I was thinking what can be my like the public for the 3D. So in this case I have two. The first is the like the conservation and stuff. So I can make creating a special Blender like file to be open like for the museum stuff. I have like all the conservation information. That is the one more for internal work, and the other is for the public. I'm trying to like see the DPO have one viewer. It's just the Voyager. So I'm trying to see the opportunities to use that viewer to put that maybe in the page of the museum, or we are like starting to see where is like the form to put that the model like open for the public. But principally that is the idea what we have for a viewer.
A follow-up question,
Yeah.
are you working with a curator on this to kind of?
Yeah, we was talking with Aisha, and she was part of this too. Like, and she was very interested to see like, for example, sometimes not all the people is be able to see all the videos of the electronic superhighway. So we was watching the form with the 3D to have like a new like conversation with the artwork a little bit, for the people who have more opportunities to see some details in the artwork. So yeah, we was like directly working with Aisha, who is like the Chinese media curator in the summer. I don't know.
How are you planning on storing and organizing all the information that you're generating during the production of the model?
Okay, right now we are like searching the forum to put all this information in Paik. Is a DPO tool too for like the to put all this information. And for the moment, I have like 2 copies of all my work, like in physics, in my computer, another like in another device, and I am making all the metadata and all the process like during my process, my work. But yeah, we are planning principally to use Paik to like organize all the files and all the information and save that information for the future, because it's the idea to not only have like something huge for the moment, we want to save that information for a long time.
I might have missed this, but were you able to pull, where did the individual video files come from? Were you able to pull those directly from the installation, like a storage device on the installation?
Like we in the museum done create like the digitation of all the videos of like each video for state. So we have like different files in different size. So for example, in this case, I'm using like a digital version of the videos, because in first time the videos was in Laserdisc, and now we have like a digital files. So I'm using like for a little low like file to create like the put that ones in the tree. That respond to the question or was okay. Something more? Thank you so much for your time.